Welcome to the Royal Academy of Engineering for this very special event this evening. My name is Hannah Previtt. I'm a business journalist for The Times and The Sunday Times, and I am delighted to be your host this evening. Supporting and celebrating enterprise, innovation and skills across the UK is a vital part of the Academy's work. Among the initiatives it champions is the MacRobert Award, the UK's longest-running and most prestigious national prize for engineering innovation. Originally founded by the MacRobert Trust in 1969, the award is now presented and run by the Royal Academy of Engineering with support from the Worshipful Company of Engineers. Thank you to both the MacRobert Trust and the Worshipful Company of Engineers for supporting this event this evening. Each year, a winning team receives a gold medal and a £50,000 prize to recognise outstanding innovation, tangible societal benefit, and proven commercial success. And the 2023 award is now open for entries, which is one of the reasons we are gathered here tonight. You have until the end of January to enter for this unique prize. The MacRobert Award has consistently celebrated world-first health innovations, from the pioneering CT scanner in 1972 to the first laser retinal scanner in 2006 and the first bionic hand in 2008. And that brings us to this year's winner, a health application that is already helping to improve the lives of kidney dialysis patients, particularly in the UK and North America. Quanta Dialysis Technologies, based in Warwick in the West Midlands, has developed a portable dialysis machine that can make home dialysis more affordable and also help to relieve the enormous pressure on our hospitals. And as we'll see in a video in just a second, a key step in this innovation was to re-engineer a fast food juice dispenser. Let's play the tape.
The SC Plus dialysis machine is a compact and portable unit that provides renal replacement therapy for patients with kidney failure. Traditional hemodialysis machines are like the size of a fridge freezer with lots of complicated plumbing in there which needs maintenance. What we have done is actually effectively taken all of that tubing and compress it into a two-dimensional flat structure, a cartridge. The origins of our innovation are originally founded in the design of a juice dispensing machine. And it's that sort of cross-fertilisation from one industry to another that has fostered this innovation that's so radical to the industry.
Since its invention, really, dialysis has primarily been delivered in hospitals. So the typical regime is 3 times a week for 4 hours at a time, and that really hasn't changed and is very much a schedule that's built around the convenience of the hospital and the healthcare provider. So getting patients to dialyse at home, which is what SC Plus was designed to do, means they can have their own schedule which is fitted around all of their other life commitments and responsibilities. They can vary that schedule as much as they want to, and critically they can actually do more than the minimum 3 times a week.
The judges were impressed with the innovative and disruptive concept. It's particularly important not just for the patient using it at home, but also for nursing staff and healthcare staff using the machine in different settings.
Extraordinary stuff. So please welcome our first guest this evening, Professor Clive Buckbury, Fellow of the Academy and Chief Technology Officer at Quanta Dialysis Technologies, which is this year's winner of the MacRobert Award. Please join me, Clive. Welcome.
Hi, thank you, Anna.
And I was lucky enough to have a first-hand kind of demonstration almost of the machine outside earlier. So, but let's go back to the very beginning. Where did the inspiration come from?
To explain that a little bit first, the need actually came from the fact that our parent company used to make a dialysis machine under licence, and they wanted to move up the value chain for that product with their own technology. And they came to us as like the in-house innovation group to actually analyse that problem and say, how would you make a better valve? And it was a fellow member of the original team who actually had the brainwave to say, well, and actually the courage to say, you can't solve that problem. The laws of physics won't allow you to keep that valve clean. So if we just do that, we'll just be making another Me Too dialysis machine. So he said, well, why don't we just throw it away? Because what we'd done with this juice dispensing machine was make a disposable pump that went on the bag of orange juice concentrate. And so it was then, oh, okay. And actually, the trouble is, he was told to stop. And to be honest, he didn't stop. He kept evolving this machine and this cartridge around this concept. And that's where it actually came from. So it did come from a juice dispensing machine.
So paint a picture of the scale of the problem in the UK. So how many dialysis patients are there?
There are currently 28,000, just under 28,000 dialysis patients in the UK. I think it's 2.2 million globally. And each one of them has to go to a clinic 3 times a week for 4 hours. So that gives you some idea of the actual numbers. So that then means in turn that particularly for the NHS, and it depends on how you calculate the budget, but it's something like 2 to 3% of the NHS budget is just on those 28,000 patients. And that's growing at something like 5% per annum each year.
Wow, and we all know the extraordinary strain that the NHS is under at the moment. And what about the disruption to patients' lives? It's something we talked about briefly before, and a dear friend of mine is having dialysis at the moment, and it's an absolute, it's like throwing a bomb into the middle of his life.
It is, and it's easy to think of it as just 3-4 hour sessions, but the nature of the illness means that, and just often the location of where clinics are to get the therapy, that it takes an hour to get there, particularly if you're in London, for example. It maybe then takes an hour to get home, and that's assuming that ambulances or taxis are there and then on it. So that's in that window as well. And then physiologically, your body's undergoing massive changes. So just to explain a little bit about that, when you have kidney failure, people think of it as the toxins that you can't actually remove. So what's in your blood that you can't get out through your pee and urine. But the actual real toxin is water. So, and what that does is build up lots of fluid in your body, obviously. So we've got glasses of water in front of us. In that 48 hours between treatments, you can barely manage 8 small glasses of water because of all the other water that's in fruit, vegetables, etc., etc. So when that water is removed during the dialysis session, it's probably not quite right, but it's not far off to say it's a bit like you've done 2 marathons back to back because of the amount of water that has to be taken off you, because that's the biggest toxin. So people and patients in that case often feel washed out. So really, the solution to it is to actually dialyse little and often rather than these 3 defined blocks as prescribed throughout all the health care services globally at the moment. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so what's the impact of your machine on patients? What's some of the first-hand feedback that you've had?
Well, it's freedom of choice. So those that go home, and it doesn't suit everybody to go home, of course. Some people want the security of being in a hospital. Some people necessarily don't have the technical confidence to actually use a machine, or the fear of actually putting 2 actually quite large needles into your arm. I mean, I tend to faint. I can't put contact lenses in, But it's so if they can overcome that and they can dialyse at home, then they can dialyse when they want. And we often see our patients, and I checked this evening. We've got, as we came on air, we had 37 patients using our machine currently in clinics this evening. So they're starting quite late. Some of them will do it overnight. Some of them will do it first thing in the morning. Well, they wouldn't get that flexibility of freedom if they were in a clinic. So what they now effectively have the choice, and it's a phrase that's often used, but it's very true. Rather than living to dialyse, they dialyse to live, which is an extraordinary turnaround.
Yeah, that must be an incredible feeling for you and the team. And so paint a picture of the scale of the business today. Where are you on the kind of commercialisation journey?
Where we came from originally, when we span ourselves out, because we asked a cheeky question of the CEO of IMI PLC at the time. We exchanged the patents for £1. That was the original formal exchange for the original patent, 2 patents actually. And we've grown since then over the ensuing 14 years. We've now got CE approval, FDA approval. We have 200 machines or so in the UK, something like 40 in the US, and we've raised £400 million plus of funding.
Gosh.
So,
and how many people do you have now?
Now so think about
All those investors whose cash you've taken. How many people do you have now? Where are you based?
I think we're just about 250, and we're primarily based out of Warwick, in Warwickshire, England. But we also have a place in Beverley in America, which is the start of our American operation, of course. And the clinics, we're at about 14 different clinics in the UK, from Carlisle to Sunderland, from Portsmouth to Exeter. And there's about 45 home dialysis patients at this moment in time. I'm looking at Kate, who's our BD. She's slightly... So so it's of that order of magnitude, yeah.
Incredibly inspiring stuff. And so obviously you won the MacRobert Award this year. Congratulations to you and the team. Why did you decide to enter the award? What does it mean to you?
There's three. I'll try and keep it brief because my wife will tell me to sort of stop rattling on. First one was when I graduated, the gentleman who actually convinced me to go into engineering, he'd been part of the team that won the MacRobert Award in 1983 with Rust and gas turbines. So in a way, I always knew about it. And then when I was nominated as a Fellow of the Royal Academy, Ian Nussey, who's here tonight, he said, I think you'll win it one day. I'll give you about 6 years. Well, it took a bit longer, sorry Ian. But yeah, we'll fulfil that promise. But the biggest one is personal. And my father always used to tease me because I came from a completely non-academic, non-engineering background. And my dad always used to say, he said, why do you want to be an engineer? You can't engineer an ice cream cornet. You know, and that was his way of taking fun out of me and spurring me on. So I owe it to my dad as well. So that, but, you know, we also did it because we wanted recognition for the engineering team as well. And the engineering team, you know, it's easy to see the commercial success, which reflects a lot on the commercial and the marketing team. But to go to the MacRobert Award and put yourself out there in front of the peers in the industry and have your baby judged agnostically for how good it is against innovation, clinical, societal need and commercial success is something that, you know, is very special for the engineering team to see that they've reached that bar. So it's an enormous credit to them, and that's why we wanted to do it as well.
Well, huge congratulations. And what does the future hold? So we're going to be joined in a second by our fellow panellists, but what's the next stage of that kind of scale-up journey for you?
It is commercial rollout, further in the UK and particularly in the US, because that's an enormous market and one that is ripe for more home dialysis in particular. Now, following on from that, you know, in part of the journey, it's scaling up, not so much the innovation now, although there's lots we could do, but it's scaling up the manufacturing to go with it, because that's got to go through orders of magnitude change from just like almost bespoke parts to small limited volume custom production to like manufacturing at scale. And particularly with our cartridge technology, that's a real challenge. And so really, as much of our innovation is now looking at innovating the manufacturing processes to go through that cycle as it actually is the device itself. So it's an ongoing journey, commercial success and manufacturing scale up. That's the real challenge.
Well, we're going to talk some more about that in just a moment with one of our fellow panellists. Perhaps Liz has some gems that she can share about scaling up manufacturing. But for now, Clive, that was just so inspiring. Thank you very much. And please come up and join us on stage. So our three brilliant panellists that are now joining us are Naomi Turner, who is Vice President of Technology Development and Commercialisation at BP, and she leads a global team focused on developing low-carbon technologies as well as leading BP's technology licensing capability. And then we have Sir Richard Friend, Fellow of the Academy. I'm sure many of you here will know him, Professor in Physics at the University of Cambridge and Chair of the MacRobert Award judges, so you know who to schmooze at drinks later. Richard and his colleagues won the MacRobert Award in 2002 for organic light-emitting diodes developed by Cambridge Display Technology. And last but not least, we have Liz Upton, Chief Marketing Officer and a co-founder of Raspberry Pi, which won the MacRobert Award in 2017 for Raspberry Pi, the credit card-sized device that is the best-selling computer to come out of the UK. So 3 very impressive panellists joining us up here alongside Clive. So Richard, if I could come to you first. We've just heard from Clive about the amazing work at Quanta, but can you give us a bit more insight? There was a little in the video earlier about what it is that you look for on the judging panel, and how easy is it to compare a startup or a scale-up like Quanta with the mighty BP or another large corporate?
Well, the MacRobert Award is for innovation in engineering, and we do really want to see that innovation, just something that you didn't expect to happen, and when you see it you think, my goodness, that's clever. So I think there's that, you can sort of see it, and there's no formula for what it is, but when you see it you know what it is. So I think that's key. And then of course a big component is that it has to be taken all the way through to being commercially successful. So that's a pretty tough order. That can happen in organisations of any size, and if you look at past winners of the MacRobert Award, it's everything from very small companies to the largest companies. But I think common to all of those is there's always a team. This is an award given to a team, and it's almost always the case that that team works together in a very special way, and that's true across all sizes of organisation.
And I can see lots of nodding here, and it is a theme that we will return to, the kind of team dynamics and how you get that right. But to Noemi next, BP has won the MacRobert Award 3 times, but on the oil exploration side of the business. What does innovation mean to BP in 2022, and where do you see the greatest challenges and opportunities?
So innovation really for BP is part of our net zero aims. I could be very proud and talk about our amazing research and development team. I could talk about our university collaboration, our inventions, but actually, really innovation it exists across the whole company. Our strategy is based on 3 pillars: resilient hydrocarbon, convenience mobility, and low carbon energy. And you find innovation in all of these pillars. In resilient hydrocarbon, we develop and deploy sustainable aviation fuels. We pioneer new technologies to measure and eliminate methane emission. In the convenience and mobility, we develop data center coolants or electric vehicles, lubricants. And in the low carbon energy, you can see we're pioneering blue hydrogen, carbon capture, storage here in the UK, in Teesside, and we're decarbonizing an industry, creating jobs. But all those examples, what they have in common is that they bring together amazing deep expertise of science, of engineering, with a capability to deliver at scale, to build partnerships and build businesses. And that is the innovation that exists throughout the whole company. You've talked about challenges and opportunities. Honestly, the energy transition we have to create massive brand new infrastructures. Value chains are going to be created, and existing value chains are going to be disrupted. And what that means is we need an order of magnitude more of solar, of wind. We need an order, 4 times more hydrogen. We need that the world will need twice the amount of electricity. And that's massive. That's just massive. That will mean thousands of small and medium-sized businesses. That will mean massive infrastructure projects. That will also mean billions of components. And just to talk about the challenges and opportunities, it's like we tend to focus about the big steps, the big step changes, but actually this is perspiration and inspiration that will bring the change.
And one of the things I'll come back to you on later on is about building a culture of innovation, because we all know that big companies, and I put it to you earlier, I work for a large company myself, they're not always, there's often a lot of bureaucracy. They can be a lot slower than the smaller companies to get off the starting blocks potentially, but we'll come back to that. Liz, I'd love to hear from you now. So can you give everybody a quick kind of reminder of how you got started, and then as I trailed earlier, and then how you had to kind of scale due to unprecedented demand for the product really quickly?
Sure, well, we had very parochial ambitions to start with. The idea with Raspberry Pi was that we wanted to be able to give kids coming to open days at Cambridge a little computer that they could own. And then if they came back for an interview, we could say to them, well, what did you do with that little computer that we gave you? Lovely ideas, and we thought we'd make about 2,000, maybe. So we started rolling up to launch. We had ordered 2,000 from a factory in China, and we had 100,000 orders on the first day, which is, I believe, what business schools call a success disaster. It was an exciting year. So we worked very, very hard, first of all, to reshore manufacturing to the UK. We make Raspberry Pis in Wales now at a Sony facility in Pencoed, near Bridgend. And it's made things infinitely easier for us because there's a lot more automation, which actually makes it less expensive to make than it was in China at that time because you weren't employing as many people. It's far easier because it's 4 hours down the road. If something goes wrong at the factory, we can hop in the car and go and poke things, which you can't really do in China. And no language barrier either. And also we found out when manufacturing in China, you'd get very, very strange part substitutions, which would mean that occasionally you'd come back with mag jacks with no mag. So there was that. There was a lot of financial engineering to be done to make sure that we had the capital to actually make what we needed. And part of that was going into partnership with 2 manufacturing licensees as well. So we're down to one licensing manufacturer now, and we have a much bigger network of resellers. That's been a 10-year thing. So we've now sold about 50 million Raspberry Pis after starting with 2,000.
Absolutely extraordinary. And at which point in that journey did you win the MacRobert Award, and what impact did that have on your business?
So let me think, that was 2017. It was a big deal for us, not least because we started with this educational aim, which is still very, very fundamental to what we do. All of our profits go back to the Raspberry Pi Foundation, which looks at computing education. But because that was part of the brand, there was, I think, a perception that a Raspberry Pi was a toy. It was a thing for schools. It was a computer for children. So to have the device recognised by the Academy as a proper piece of solid British engineering was actually incredibly helpful for us. And nowadays, far more than half of our sales go into business and into enterprise and into manufacture. So you'll find a lot of factories running off Raspberry Pis. You'll find a lot of businesses like call centres running thin clients, which are Raspberry Pis, and it brings costs down enormously. And it's really good to see them out there.
And so if I could come to you with my first question now for the next part of the panel discussion, it's coming back to that part about kind of teams and building the right mix of skills in a teams. So something I hear often as a journalist interviewing entrepreneurs is that if you've got a team of pure academics, sometimes it's harder to get past the commercialization phase because they don't necessarily have that skill set automatically. So what mix of skills did you have in that founding team?
I think we were quite fortunate there, actually. We did have a large number of academics, and we really couldn't have managed without those people. It was really fundamental to what we were doing. But we also had, well, in fact, one of them over there, Pete, who runs an electronics manufacturing business. We had people from the semiconductor industry. And people who'd come to that in different ways as well, people who'd gone from academia into semiconductor. We had people who'd come through apprenticeship programs. And then there was me. I have a law degree. I've worked as a journalist. So there were lots of different skill sets coming together. And I really don't think we could have managed it without the very abstruse set of skills that we had.
And Richard, I can see you nodding along there. So what's the secrets to success in building a team that can take a product or, just from an idea in a lab all the way through?
Well, I absolutely agree that if you just leave it to a group of academics, we will do something interesting, but it won't be commercial, and we won't have spotted who the customers are in general. So you need something magic. And my own experience is that it's the diversity of the group that is the magic. That's what makes it really interesting. It's a really interesting break from my day job. But you need these disparate skills and understanding how to manufacture, how to find who the customers really are, what they actually want to buy. It's a really important skill set.
And Clive, I can see you nodding along there as well. So, and you mentioned you have quite a large founding team also, don't you?
Yeah, there were 7 of us originally that span out and exchanged that patents for £1. And if I look at the skill set, I mean, there were different types of mechanical engineers and electrical engineers from different industries, none of them from medical. So I think one of the things that helped was the fact we just asked dumb questions and we didn't accept the traditional paradigms about why things were done. So it's that thing about actually crazy naivety that said, well, of course you can do it. Because we were all problem solvers, that just seemed like, oh, of course we're going to solve it, aren't we? Now, benefit in hindsight, you probably never would have got started in the first place. But at the time, a bit like Richard has said, it's that diversity, that spectrum of different ideas, and like you were saying as well, that really knit things together. And I think the thing now is, how do we, as that original Magnificent 7, because I think 4 of us are still within the company, how do we let go? How do we let new people start to take over? Because it's not just about the engineering, it's about the manufacturing and the commercial and the marketing, new product development. So it can't be just us anymore, but we've got to give that sort of DNA and architecture. So we're having to mature and grow up a little bit and actually stop being a bunch of loose cannons and actually help others to grow the business. And that's
a really interesting point. And at a technology conference I was helping to host a few weeks ago, we were talking about sales and how sales is almost a bit of a dirty word. Yeah. But actually, without that superstar salesperson or sales team, your amazing idea is never going to make it off the blocks, is it?
Correct, yeah. And for that next generation, we're doing some really interesting work now with a lady called Melinda in our US team, looking at new product development, looking back at the voice of the customer and all that sort of stuff. So it's actually quite interesting to go back and actually rethink it all through in the benefit of hindsight, what we now know. Have we built up our own urban myths about what it should be? Because we've been in it almost too long again, and we got too close to our baby to see the real wood for the trees. So it's an interesting exercise.
I can imagine. And Noemi, how about when you're building teams? Obviously, you run a global team yourself. And you've probably also got kind of geographical kind of issues there, constraints. You're probably putting people from different teams around the world. So how do you put a team together on a project?
So really the best innovation that has ever happened has always been on the interfaces of disciplines. And actually, when we've reorganized ourselves after 2020, we've really looked at how do we facilitate bringing the best skills together in a team across disciplines. Science and engineering, physical, digital, didn't matter. Actually bringing all these people, and really, 2 things were really important. The first thing was being customer-centric, bringing the customer along. And I've heard you both talking about the customer, but really you need to have the customer from day one. You need to listen to the naysayers, actually, because we tend to love our innovation. And actually the customers are the best to tell us, no. But you also need them you need to take them along, because they're the ones who are going to be investing and help you scale up. So that's one thing. And the second really important message and change of mindset is learning to fail. And that failing is a success. And actually, you learn, you fail, you learn, and you do it again, or you do something else slightly different. And recognizing that actually, okay, that wasn't what the customer wanted, etc., is really what's going to drive that amazing team together.
So how do you make that decision? So if you've been working really hard on a project, and like you said, it was your baby and you loved it, but actually deep down, you know it hasn't got legs, it's not going to be a commercial success for whatever reason, how do you go about killing it?
It's a great question. So some people say it's never ever. It's never completely dead. It just goes on the shelf, So and there's a little bit of that actually. We have worked on technologies and developed them to a certain point, but actually it didn't make sense at the time. There wasn't the appetite. It wasn't what was, what the world needed. And actually, we're bringing them back now. So that's quite reassuring. But actually, really making a decision fast is really the key to. Okay, that was great. What are we going to learn? Why? But let's make that decision fast. Is another key to that. Great success of failing.
Failing fast, got it. So Richard, how would you describe the current climate for engineering innovation in the UK? Have we got all the ingredients we need here to be a player on the world stage?
Well, where we do it well, we're very good. The problem is we don't do enough of it. And that's something which is hurting our pockets. And we have wonderful examples of where, as we've been hearing from Clive, it's just a beautiful story. Took patient investors, it's 14 years and counting, and 400 million. Success doesn't come quickly if you're going to win big. And that is a challenge that we have to take a fairly long-term view about what happens. I think the concern is that manufacturing in the UK continues to shrink as a fraction of GDP, and manufacturing actually produces very well-paid jobs. It raises productivity. And I think we need to plan for a longer term and that does involve making some decisions about primarily skills. It comes down to if you want to exploit a great idea or innovation, you need to be able to get hold of the people who can do it, and they need to be around.
And we're going to come back to skills in just a second, but Liz, I want to come to you on this because I know that you have quite strong views about what we need to be doing more of as a country to foster that culture of innovation. So, for example, there is more that the government could be doing to help, is there not?
Yeah, I think that there's this lovely fairy tale that Silicon Valley sort of came into being from nothing, just this lovely fluorescence of lots of clever people sort of sitting around and shaking hands and making small businesses, and they became big. But actually what happened was that the American government was putting an enormous amount of defence money into the area. So people come to Silicon Valley to work in those jobs. They join affinity groups, they meet each other. That's where the other businesses come from. And there's a huge amount of money sloshing around to service those defence businesses. And this is where your internet comes from. This is where all of those early internet companies come from. And boom, Silicon Valley. We don't have anything like that here. One problem is that a lot of government investment tends to be hypothecated. So if I've got a bioscience cluster, I'm going to put money into bioscience there. It would be much nicer to say, start something big and expect ancillary businesses to come around and feed off it. That's where you get scale. And that's not what we're doing here. And there are huge lacunae in what the government's looking at in terms of investment. We're at the moment, we make our own silicon for our microcontroller chips. And there is nowhere in Europe that we can make wafers. So we're having to go to Taiwan. And we've seen with the pandemic and what's happened afterwards that when you're stuck with one supplier or one geography that you're able to use, things can go very bad very, very quickly. So here in the UK, you've got Newport Wafer Fab, which has been in the news a lot recently. But the process nodes that they're working on are massive. That's really not useful to us. And from what I can make out, there's really nowhere else that we can go right now. So America, you've got the CHIP Act. They're actually looking at bringing in really, really big plants, which are an enormous, enormous investment of the sort that I don't see our government making at the moment, in order to stop some of this uncertainty and to foster innovation in their own geography. I'd love to see us doing more of that here.
Yeah, and lots of entrepreneurs in the medtech space specifically have told me previously that there's no incentives for them to manufacture here, right? In the same way that other governments, will make overtures to come and manufacture here.
Well, semiconductor policy in the UK lives with the Department of Digital Media and Sport at the moment, which makes no sense to me at all. I thought, it's computer stuff, so it's digital, right? Where it ought to live with the Treasury. It's so fundamental to how this country does business.
And Clive, how about you when it comes to, we were talking about manufacturing earlier. When you get to large-scale manufacturing, do you have any desire to do it here in the UK?
We do. There are some, again, because we haven't invested in that in the long term, knowledge about how to manufacture complex medical devices doesn't really exist in this country. In the 60s it did. Lucas used to do it, a very famous old name. They made dialysis machines, but we lost that. And therefore there is some technical barriers there as to how do you manufacture medical devices and still get FDA approval. And because we haven't invested in that and generated our own self-reliance, not just in our industry, but in others, it's very, very difficult to manufacture in this country. And there are then some structural issues, I don't think investors in this country really like manufacturing. None of our 400 million came from the UK in its own right. Our first investors were, although they're in the news a lot, the National Bank of Greece, Ireland, who were quite a lot, at the time when Lehman Brothers and the crash were also in the news a lot, but that's where 2 of the 3 investors, the other one came from southern Germany, in Bavaria. And that was our first set of investors, and they followed us through very patiently, like Richard said. And then all our recent investors are, big VCs out the States because they want us to go to the States with our product. Mm-hmm. Why is that not in the UK? We could not get anything out the UK.
Well, as you said, it's what Richard said about the patient capital. We just don't seem to have it here. And what about skills? So for you, are you able to access the talent that you need here in the UK?
There are lots of really talented people, particularly at the front end innovation side and all that sort of stuff. Where we are located in the Midlands, it tends to get sucked up by Jaguar Land Rover. But those skills are transferable. It's not like they just have to be automotive and rather than medtech. I came from an automotive background. It didn't do me any harm whatsoever. In actual fact, it was quite useful because from a health and safety point of view, things like aerospace, automotive and nuclear were like 10, 15 years ago of medical devices. Then, as the Royal Academy know, they did a really good peer-reviewed paper and booklet about that in 2013, taking that experience into other industries. So the skills are there, they are transferable, but it probably brings us on to education. I think we're still not then doing enough with our education system and our youth today through apprenticeships and in university to create more diversity of thinking in our subjects.
But it is a joined-up approach, isn't it, Noemi? We can't always tell the government, or the public sector to go and fix all our problems. What are you doing at BP to foster that next generation of talented people?
So a few things really that came to mind in this discussion. The first thing is really investors need to understand science, technology, engineering are an investment, and they are an investment for the future, and they are what we need to invest in now to build the capability that we're going to need. And that's really important because actually a proof of concept or a pilot unit is not to make money, it's to build that capability. So just, to bring that real, just actually you bring your customer along. So again, and then, in terms of skills, you talked about transferable skills. There's no shortage of talent, but we need to be able to show these talents, that they will be the leaders of the energy transition. They will be, that we're showing them examples of where we have transferred skills to low carbon energies. Because honestly, somebody who understands, what happens underground really will be amazing at carbon storage, for example. And then we also need to have amazing role models. And role models, not like when I started, the role model was the one female that was at the top. But actually, a role model is somebody who's innovated as part of a team differently, or somebody who has succeeded despite different background. And this is just really, we need to make all those views really visible to attract these talents to solve all the amazing problems and opportunities we have.
Thank you, Noemi. And Richard, you're not off the hook. I'm going to come back to you in a second about to talk about what you're doing at Cambridge and how you're, making sure you shape young people in the right ways to prepare them for the world of work. But I know that this is a topic that you're really passionate about, Liz. So I'd like to bring you in here and the work that you're doing at Raspberry Pi with the foundation around the next generation of skilled, talented young people.
Yeah, so the Raspberry Pi Foundation is a charity, and we have a rather unusual setup in that they own the engineering company, so all of our profits go back up to the foundation. And they're spent on training teachers, setting up educational programs for kids in the UK and around the world in CS. And we have seen a difference through that, but there are still areas that I would like to see us as a country and us as an organisation doing much better in. Girls, in particular. Poor white boys on school dinners, are on free school dinners, are possibly the most underserved group in the country, and they do tend to get elided because they're white and they're boys. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on with girls. We have a programme of research that we're actually doing with the university at the moment on what's happening with girls in STEM and where the issues are. There's something strange and cultural going on. If you look at, say, Iran, I don't think we can say that Iran is a more feminist country than the United Kingdom. 68% of the graduates in STEM subjects in Iran are women. And there's a fundamental difference in the way that girls are taught to approach these difficult subjects, we sometimes call them over here. There are lullabies that mothers in Iran will sing their little girls about when you grow up and are an engineer. I don't think we have any of those here. They're mostly about
You must send them
dogs.
to me to sing to my own children. Yeah.
And Italy, I've just come back from Maker Faire in Rome, and women are so much better represented at the university level. If you're in a physics or a maths department in Italy, there are... And again, I don't think there is anything fundamentally less sexist about Italian culture, but there's something that they're doing differently than what we're doing here, and I'd very much like to find out what those things are.
Well, funnily enough, I think maybe we should put this to Richard, see if he knows what's happening at that level. I saw you nodding along there about girls in STEM. Is it still a problem?
I just think that children's education is the most important area. By the time we get them at university, we've got what we've got, and we obviously do what we can with them. But fixing this problem is so important. And I get the sense that, and I don't know Iran, but if you want to lift yourself out of a life that you want, that your parents have lived, and you want to do better, then an engineering degree is a pretty good option in large parts of the developing world. Yeah. And we perhaps kids don't feel they have to strive so hard.
That's true.
Is that, I don't want to suggest that kids don't work hard, but there's something about ambition that is not, you see it elsewhere rather more strongly. But to come to what we do with them when they're at university, I think there has been a transformation. I mean, Cambridge is, we're fortunate that by a number of, well, probably more luck than by design, we managed to get a fabulous technology cluster, which is much larger than the university now. And I think actually the educational experience, particularly for the graduate students, which is now about half the university, even if you're in philosophy or history or whatever, you will probably know somebody who's involved in some sort of startup or small company. And I think that culturally, our student body does go away with a sort of sense that you need to equip yourself with a wider skill set to be able to steer through to find interesting opportunities. And so I'm very positive about that. And we do some active organisation for entrepreneurship courses, but a lot of it is sort of self-replicating.
I mean, we find that there are certainly more female graduates now than there were 10 years ago. We're seeing more female interns as well. One thing that we were saying earlier about affinity groups, actually, I think the internet has made things a lot easier for girls and for boys who aren't necessarily from these backgrounds, because you used to be in a position, you were very, very isolated at your school pre-internet. You didn't necessarily have any friends who were interested in things you were. It's very hard to avoid making friends who are interested in the things you are now.
But there are still very serious problems about science teaching in quite a largely maintained sector.
And it's really interesting because kids want to become something that they like, that they see, and there's something really, you make the science, the technology, the engineering careers something appealing, and you tell them these wonderful stories. And I remember my chemistry teacher. He was the one who led me to where I am today. But this is because he was telling us stories, and we loved listening to him. And actually, you start creating an image of something that you want to become, and then those kids will come. The talent is there.
I think one of the things I observe from it, and I think we're almost in the same here, and this is my reflection, is that we keep using the word STEM, and I prefer it when it's STEAM. And I just love the fact we should have arts in there. Because even if you look at our machine, for example, it's got an aesthetic about it. It looks like an iPhone on the front fascia and all the rest of it. So it's inviting to use, and it's deliberately done like that so people don't get institutionalised when they look at and think about dialysis, that it must be like in a clinic setting. It must be something different from that. And I think that elasticity between the A in STEM to make it STEAM would help. And I think that would also make it much more engaging for all sorts of children to get involved into understanding the value of doing science, because it is hard, and most of them enjoy painting and things like that. So if they can create through painting and then get taught you're going to solve a problem that's then artistic but has some merit to it, it's good. And if you think of the likes of David Hockney, so he started making montages out of Polaroid pictures. So he used technology to make art, which was quite interesting. And going to what you were just saying, Naomi, where was the first bioengineer? I'll throw this one out there. You could say it was Mary Shelley. When she described Frankenstein, that was the first true bioengineering project. And it wasn't an engineer or a scientist who came up with that. That was a lady thinking creatively, and that then painted a picture for everybody.
That's a really good point, and actually it comes back to something that we were discussing at the Tech Summit a few weeks ago with Poppy Gustafsson, the founder of Darktrace, and she was saying, and I think this was really interesting, that as technology entrepreneurs, we should be drawing people from all disciplines, and actually some of the best engineers that she's ever hired did an arts undergrad. So actually kind of looking beyond the kind of normal parameters.
Well, one of the first people that we employed at Raspberry Pi was in fact an artist in residence, because one of the ways that we have always got children into computing is by doing physical computing. It's much more engaging for them if they can turn an LED on and off over here somewhere rather than turning a pixel on and off on a screen. So we have a maker in residence now who makes what are basically art projects that have some robotics or electronics capability as well. And it really does work. I mean, it's a way to sell engineering into... But that artist in residence that we had was a woman, and she really ought to have been in an engineering track. But at school, she'd been told she liked to make things, so clearly she was an artist. She wasn't an engineer, she was a girl, she was an artist. The boys who did the same things went on to engineering jobs, and that's something I'd like to change.
Very interesting. Sorry, I can see that this has got you all going now, but I'm just going to interrupt you for a second to remind you to please submit your questions to us for the panel to answer here. So you can use the Slido platform if you're here in the room. For those of you joining us at home, you can put those into the LinkedIn comments. And I do have one from our audience, so we must answer it. Do the panel have any thoughts on dealing with the regulatory authorities, which tend to be risk and hence innovation averse? From David Johnston. So thank you for your question. I think, Clive, you talked about dealing with the regulators earlier. What was that experience like for you?
Well, I know when we went to the FDA and we had to do an initial presentation to them about our technology to pave the way for the regulatory submission that we then actually took forward over that 2 years thereafter, they were just desperate for innovation. And we actually found them incredibly receptive. We had to stop the meeting because it was scheduled for 2 hours and I think it ran on for 4. And they just kept wanting to know more and more about the machine. And I think one of the things that in that instance worked, maybe it's just that sort of, bit of Britishness that came over from it, because really all the dialysis manufacturers, were going to the FDA were US based in their operations, even though they might have been German, they were US centric and US based. So it came with a different culture and presentation. And it was like, actually just be open and honest. Try not to be too cute with them, and they just opened up, and it's been really refreshing. I have to say the FDA were really, really refreshing. In Europe, it's a different system, of course, so there it's devolved into a series of notified bodies. We specifically chose to work with TUV because they had the highest technical expertise in dialysis machines, and they actually then, because we were quite open and interactive with them, they helped us raise our bar about how we should do the submission. So to me, it's just be open and honest and just ask good, straight, direct questions.
Okay, some good advice there. Have you got anything you'd like to add, Naomi?
Actually, it applies to even though the big businesses and the energy transition. It's really amazing. We engage with aviation bodies about novel sustainable aviation fuels and novel techniques, and actually making them from really interesting feedstocks. And actually, but you spend time, you explain, you say how you're gonna do it. And you talked about risk. Actually, the question was about risk. Yes, you talk about the risks associated, because in everything we do, there's always a risk. But actually understand the risk. And then, you take those bodies along with you in an ideal world.
And another question, do you think that true innovation comes from evolution or revolution? I feel like that's the name of a lecture rather than a question to our panel, but I'm going to throw that one to you, Richard.
Oh, well, there isn't a single answer, is there? I'll briefly say what I think about the energy transition, and that is, if you look around at how we generate, store and use energy, in some areas we do quite well. Aviation is quite efficient, and other areas it's absolute rubbish. And the capacity for revolution is there simply because what we're doing at the moment is way off the mark. The example that we now take for granted is the factor of 10 improvement in efficiency for lighting when we switch from tungsten light bulbs to LEDs. And I think you can actually track where those opportunities to see a revolution lie. And I think they're going to happen in the energy world. But evolution has its role too.
A big question, very succinctly put, so thank you very much, Richard. We have a question from Heidi Giannoni. Oh, I'm probably doing a very bad job of that, from Arup. Do you think that we need to be better at communicating the value and wealth creation potential of science and engineering creativity? Liz, I'm going to send that one your way.
That actually speaks to what Richard was just saying. It's difficult, isn't it, if you're comfortable, if you're not trying to change your life, perhaps you don't look to that. But we talk about it a lot at Raspberry Pi. We communicate about it a lot. We write a lot about how technology can make your life better, how working in technology can make your life better, how access to really interesting problems to solve and really interesting people every day is wonderful for somebody's quality of life. So, yeah, we do what we can.
And we've talked a lot about some of the challenges today, but I'd really like to end on a very positive note. So our survey of former MacRobert Award winners in the UK indicated that in general, engineers feel the UK is a hotbed of innovation. So I'd like to hear from each of you what excites you the most about UK engineering and the aspects of it that you're involved in. So let's start with you, Clive.
It's just the diversity. I mean, we talked about the paucity elsewhere further down the value chain, that we haven't got enough reliance in this country for manufacturing and various aspects like that. But that is not something you can talk about in the same terms with innovation. We have just fantastic innovation everywhere, and it's so geographically close to each other. You can go see profs at Heriot-Watt University or down at Exeter or Kent or whatever immediately and get some kind of feedback. So I think that immediacy is tremendous, and that it's not castellated in the same way as it is in certain other countries. I think it's just very diverse and well spread. So the innovation is great in this country. That I never see an issue with.
Do you think there's still lessons that we can learn from other countries?
Well, I think there's probably, what do we do then to create centres of expertise, and things like the Fraunhofer Institutes in Germany are maybe a model that we should consider. To sort of then create industry centres, a bit like my three colleagues here have talked about as well. So I think that is something that we could do, but that needs to be part of a longer governmental strategy. Say, for 30 years, what do we need to be reliant in? If we're going to have a fourth industrial revolution about energy change and climate change and population, water, food and everything else, then we need to decide on that now and stick to it, or not let it swing with the election, you know.
And how about you, Naomi? Obviously, you take a global view. So, you know, looking specifically at the UK, what makes us stand head and shoulders above the rest?
I'm amazed by, I'm calling them kids, but actually by the people who join our teams. I'm amazed by the innovation. I'm amazed by their passion. We've given them this amazing frame, which is you're going to solve the energy transition. You're going to make the world better and make the world better for your children. And actually, you've given them that goal, and their innovation and their talent is there. And actually, this is, for me, I'm really excited. I think the UK will be a visible part of the success of the energy transition.
And how about you, Richard?
Well, actually, I get to repeat what Clive has said. I think we're extremely good at rule breaking and discipline hopping. I think partly we've benefited from being a magnet for global talent. I mean, it's true in the great universities that particularly at the graduate level, you meet people with completely different backgrounds, and you discover a common language, and you sort of extend it, and it's very creative. So I think that we do very well, and I think that need to remember that we're global, and that means being very welcoming of talent is really important. But then Clive also made the point that we need a bit more structure when we need to assemble the skills needed to take things a step further towards serious scale-up.
And how about, so the final word to you, Liz. Fill us with hope, will you? What gets you out of bed in the mornings?
One of the things I particularly love is seeing the little businesses, the little mad businesses. It's that whole English eccentric thing. I've been working this week with a fellow who's making a bat detector using one of our microcontrollers. I was talking to a guy last week who's making a tiny little synthesizer that big that you play with your fingertips. And we see people making these things, several of them a week. A lot of them actually go on to sell in really large numbers. Some of them end up having equity events, selling to other larger businesses. But there's just such fertile madness in the UK. It's a wonderful place to be working.
Thank you so much for that. And that brings us to the end of this absolutely fascinating discussion this evening. I know we've covered a huge amount of ground and we could have gone on for much longer. I know we didn't get to all of your questions, but I hope you'll stick around for a drink afterwards, and perhaps you can grab them in the next room. So it just remains for me to thank our fabulous panellists this evening, Clive Buckbury, Noemi Turner, Richard Friend and Liz Upton. Thank you for your insights and expertise. And on behalf of the Academy, I would also like to thank the MacRobert Trust and the Worshipful Company of Engineers for their generous support of the MacRobert Award. And a reminder to those of you in the room and at home that we have until the 31st of January 2023, or rather you do, I won't be applying personally, to enter for next year's award. So for those of you joining us remotely, full details are on the Academy web address on the screen. Our guests here at the Academy are now welcome to join us for drinks, and we say farewell to our online audience. But thank you all for joining us and for your fantastic questions, and good night.